at the end of the day, we want restaurants to feel like magic, and we want to bring back an old school sense of hospitality, sort of, old school hospitality, new school tech, if you will. And when we think about hospitality in the way it's really supposed to be in the end, right? When you think back to the days of 21 Club, or when there were real maitre d's and you walk into a restaurant, you got a handshake and eye contact, and the dream moment of where you walk through the back of the restaurant, casino style. That's the sort of hospitality that we so strongly believe is fundamental to good dining.
All right, Ben, thank you so much, man.
For sure. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm just grateful that you found some time. And I'm also grateful that your office is close by here.
Of course.
So we can get the most of your time. Yeah, I don't think you need an introduction because everybody knows you. Even if they're not in tech, they know you, which is interesting. But co-founder of Eater, then Resy, now Blackbird. And for some reason, you just don't start companies that fail. Or if you do, I don't know about it. Maybe we could talk about today. But we'll talk a bunch about Blackbird today because I'm just super enamored with what you started. I didn't know a lot about it until I started reading more, and also signed up for the Substack. Sign up for the Substack, by the way. It's cool.
Appreciate that.
But it's such a smart concept. But if you don't mind, just because selfishly you have started so many businesses, there's something that you're doing right. I wanted to start with just asking you, how do you choose what problem to solve?
It's the ones that I lose sleep over, and it's the ideas and the problems that I feel like are worth solving. Now, the caveat to what I just said being that I have, it seems, a fairly narrow lane, and that lane is restaurants. So, I'm not up for solving the world's problems, but for some reason, restaurants have been an area where my passion and my entrepreneurial energy overlap, and I think I'm very lucky that that's the case. But I think the problems worth solving are the ones that are going to make the industry better and are going to ensure that restaurants thrive in the future, and that feel collaborative, honestly, in terms of the business relationship with the industry itself. And a couple of times in my career, I've come across those challenges that are ones that I can't resist. So here we are.
Yeah. What was the insight that sparked Eater? Because that's slightly different, but actually still very collaborative and obviously in the industry.
Yeah, I thought that the missing piece for restaurant storytelling when we started Eater was thinking about restaurants holistically, for one, and two, sort of closer to sports than anything else, meaning that the day-by-day, play-by-play and color was both the most fascinating thing and also worth talking about. And I felt like when the thing that got us to get Eater going was just saying, nobody's thinking about restaurants the way they're supposed to be. These places are magical. They're very dynamic. They have all these moving parts. There's all these characters who define these places. And yet, at the end of the day, when you look at what the media landscape was when we started Eater in 2000, 2003, 2004 is when we were baking it. It was just like these long form critical reviews, right? These long form sort of legacy reviews and recipes. And we just felt like there was this massive lane down the middle of this thing to just talk about restaurants day in and day out, and to reflect the obsession that people were starting to develop around them. I think the other thing that was happening, and we just got lucky with timing, restaurants in the early aughts were becoming more than places to eat. This is sort of on the heels of Food Network getting its real footing, the first wave of celebrity chefs getting to the place of being bona fide, real, actual famous people. And we just felt this whole universe is changing, and it seems like people don't quite see it yet.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's almost self-fulfilling because that was there, but Eater also created that deeper kind of community. It was like inside baseball. You know, it didn't really exist before. There was long form, but I'm curious. You know, you said that you had to stay in this industry of restaurants with these businesses you created. They're big businesses, and it's tough to start a business that services the restaurant industry. But why the restaurant industry?
It's the only thing I've been any good at, to be honest with you. I mean, I started my career when I graduated college. I went to work at MTV Networks, and almost from the very beginning when I got there, I had all these food side projects. I had a website that was a precursor to Eater called She Loves New York, where I was making these kind of quirky recommendations and writing about how to navigate this food scene. And I was just obsessed with the restaurant industry. I spent my free time and all my money in restaurants, and it somehow just sort of came together. I mean, to be honest with you, once I've found myself in restaurants and I found some footing, I haven't really thought about doing anything else. You know, there was a time when I was the editorial director of Curbed, which was Curbed, Eater, and Racked.
Yeah.
And I was always happiest when I was doing Eater stuff. I was managing Racked and I was managing Curb too. Both those sites had great writers and knew what they were doing without really my help. But I was always happiest when it was Eater stuff.
What was it like being an editor? Because that's not your background. Right?
It's hard to be an editor. I mean, and to be honest with you, in those days, I was much younger and I'm not sure I did a great job of it. But, you know, being an editor, you're not doing the writing. You have to make sure that you have to keep your writers happy. You have to keep your writers engaged. You have to keep them curious. And, you know, really good writers are deeply creative people, which I think, as you know, from being a chef, it means that there's some ego and there's some sort of emotional stuff that comes into play. You know, really, really talented creative people hate when their stuff is cut up. So being an editor is difficult, you know, but good editors make the content better. Good editors in any field make the ultimate material better. So hopefully, you know, I did that. But I also felt like blogging in those days was such a sort of greenfield thing anyway.
Yeah.
I also hopefully led by example a lot too. I till the end, I did lots of the writing, and hopefully kind of led by example in that way too.
I have like a million questions because I'm going to bounce around just because,
you
know, what is it like handing over something like that? I mean, I'm sure you're nowhere part of day to day anymore.
It's so hard. I struggled a ton handing off Eater. And for years, I made the Eater editorial staff incredibly angry because it wasn't mine anymore. And I wasn't at the wheel. And I always had feedback. And I always had feedback that was like, why are we doing this way? And A, using we was inappropriate because it wasn't mine anymore. And B, let these people have their own agenda. You know, I think the biggest thing that I've learned the hard way over time is that when you are building things and at some point you got to sort of have in your calculus that it's going to be handed off.
Yeah.
And you're going to lose control or not. And it'll be the thing that you do for the rest of time. And, you know, you'll die at the wheel. But I generally think there's going to be a time when I hand these things off. And what I've had to learn is you must figure out a way to emotionally detach and be okay handing it off. And so as you're building it and as you're thinking about what would the value proposition need to be for me to hand this thing off and feel okay about it, that's what you have to keep in the back of your head. You know, when we sold Resy to Amex, I knew that part of the sort of overall price of that was going to be that at some point I didn't control Resy anymore, and I didn't get to make the product decisions, and I didn't get to make the deals with restaurants, and I didn't get to pick what we were going to do. And it just has to go into the calculus.
What was the trigger or the catalyst that sort of helped you decide, okay, it's time where I could hand over Resy?
Well, I felt like for Resy to really grow and for Resy to get to the next level, we needed more scale and more capital than we had. And the biggest challenge building Resy was actually not OpenTable. And it was actually not how hard it is to convince restaurants to do stuff, although those things were hard. the biggest challenge that we faced building Resy is that we were building something that investors didn't want to invest in. And what I mean by that is, we were able to raise money and we did it because we had to get creative and we figured some things out along the way. But we went after, institutional investors, venture capital investors. And when venture capital investors looked at Resy, they said, well, OpenTable, when it exited, it was $2.6 billion. But Booking has since marked it down to $1 billion.
Yeah.
And that's a 15 to 20 year value proposition. And that doesn't work for our models.
Yeah.
Venture guys need to see 5 to 10 years, $10 billion.
Mhm.
I'm generalizing, but that's more or less what they need to see. And we never had that on the page with Resy. So it became really hard to raise money. So what we figured out we needed to do was we needed to raise from strategics like Airbnb and Related and EHI. But it was hard. That was the hardest part of it.
Yeah. You have all these ideas. I mean, I think it's a little bit innocuous to make it sound like, oh, you just choose the right problem. It's so hard to choose the right problem because you can think that you have the right problem. Yeah. And then it's not a big enough problem. And then no matter how well you execute on your business, and maybe I'm speaking more in terms of, technology and things like that, as opposed to a restaurant. But if you choose the wrong problem that isn't, an acute enough problem, it doesn't matter how well you execute. It's not going to be, to your point, it won't be big enough for that kind of scale. And it might just not work no matter what. Do you have any sort of framework or mental model you use to stress test, is this the right idea? You obviously had this insight with Blackbird, and you had one before that with Resy, before that with Eater, but is there something that you use to try to sort of regulate, okay, I do think this is the right idea, or this is a fucking terrible idea? And when do you get to that point,
So I think that the biggest thing that I use in terms of trying to figure out when the idea is the right idea is I try to understand what I can uniquely bring to the idea from a superpowers standpoint. Meaning, I think that actually ideas are not at all the hard part. We all have lots of ideas. Execution is the really, really hard part. And so when it comes to execution, I think the sober question to ask yourself is, am I going to be able to do this better than anyone else on the planet? When I left Amex, there was another idea I was considering, and it was about trying to help restaurants monetize IP.
Yep. I remember you telling me about this. Yeah.
So, I spent the better part of 2021 trying to figure out if this was the idea. And the observation was that restaurant IP was getting more valuable. When you say IP, what do you mean? Meaning the brands, the menus, the intellectual property, the restaurant, right?
And does that include the recipes as well?
Well, recipes you can't copyright.
Yeah.
So it doesn't technically include the recipes, but one of the businesses that I was looking at was the Second Avenue Deli.
Mm-hmm.
So, do their recipes count? No, but there are some kind of state secrets, if you will, in terms of how they get the pastrami to be the way it is.
Yeah.
How they make their matzo ball soup. So there's some of that. But the IP is Second Avenue Deli, the menu, you walk in, how do you feel? Right? What do you associate with that brand? If you were to see Second Avenue Deli on a jar of mustard, how would you feel about that? The idea that Second Avenue Deli, I desperately want them to do this, is kosher hot dogs.
Yeah.
There's one company on the planet that's doing kosher hot dogs.
Uber National.
It's got to be an opportunity.
Yeah.
But the problem with this idea for me is that I'm not a restaurant operator.
Yeah.
And I know nothing about operating restaurants, actually. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very far from what I'm any good at. So as I was getting this idea baked to fruition, at some point, I just sort of stopped and I said, this is a road that leads me to being a restaurant operator or a brand licenser if I wanted to build a house of brands and not own the assets. And neither one of those things I could see myself being any good at. And so I had to put a pin in that.
Yeah.
Although I do think it'd be I hope somebody figures that out because I think it'd be a great business.
Yeah. The hard part I feel like is it is really hard for restaurant operators to market themselves in things outside of the restaurant. I remember before we started Me's, we did this thing called Recipes for Relief during COVID. And we basically just built a consumer version of the app quickly and an e-commerce site for chefs to sell their recipes to their diners. Yeah. Some chefs made tens of thousands of dollars on this thing. We gave 100% of the proceeds to the chefs and their restaurants, but it was so hard to get them to just talk about it, post about it,
Yeah.
And you can't force someone to, to market themselves. Quick side, you talked about matzo ball soup. So 2nd Avenue, Barney Greengrass, Katz, what's your...
I mean, those are the ones.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite? Or you're not allowed to say?
I'm partial to 2nd Avenue. Barney Greengrass is great too. But I'm partial to 2nd Avenue. That's the one. When I get sick, that's the one I order. So
yeah, that's
on that
a good
basis,
one.
it's my favorite.
How do startups fail? Like, what do you've seen so many of them? Or I think you invest in a lot of them as well.
Execution, man. It comes down to whether you get the idea out the door. Essentially, you get that product market fit to click, and you get the economics to work before you run out of money. I mean, that's in really sort of surgical terms. That's what it is, right? Like a startup is every second that a startup exists, it's burning capital.
Yeah.
And you got to get it to a place where it stops burning money before people stop believing in it. And so I think that they fail because, they pick the wrong path. The sequence of priorities is wrong. When you get into the weeds, it comes down to a question of, as a startup founder, your job is to allocate capital, which means that your real job is to pick the priorities and put them in the right order. And it's really hard. They fail when you put them in the wrong order. You could look at, obviously with Blackbird, we're still building, and who knows what the outcome is going to be. I think we're incredibly excited, but the world, to the outside observer, if you're saying, let's wait and see, I don't blame you. But, with Resy, if you look at Resy and a half a dozen other companies at basically the exact same time did the same thing.
Yeah.
A half a dozen companies, all at the beginning of 2014 or 2013 to the end of 2014, a bunch of companies said OpenTable is ripe for disruption. And it came down to us, essentially, in my view, building the right things in the right order.
What were some of the things that you executed, at least at a 50,000 foot level, that you executed on differently than those others that didn't make it?
Well, I think we did things like we deployed the restaurant booking widget, which is a sort of simple thing, but is incredibly important in terms of the flywheel of growth for reservations. We had that deployed very early, way earlier than most of our competitors. And
wait, did OpenTable not have a widget?
OpenTable had a booking widget. OpenTable's booking widget, though, by and large, pointed to OpenTable.
Yeah.
So most restaurants had a version of the booking widget where when you click reserve, it bounced you to OpenTable.
Yeah.
And we felt like that was A, the complete wrong way to do that. And B, and based on OpenTable's pricing, like a humongous point of weakness where we could attack. And we were right about that. And because the added benefit of a booking widget on the restaurant's website is those customers start to become your customers.
Yeah.
Right. So you're capturing a ton of that organic demand for great restaurants. That's one example. But
yeah, I feel like Resy also did a good job of helping you discover or come up with where else to eat.
Totally.
The map and
Yeah, we had a curated approach from the start. We worked with great restaurants. And we made that known, and that we built a brand around that. No question about it.
That seems also like a go-to-market strategy you have. Start with the best, like as many of the really, really, really great restaurants, and then sort of use them as like your partners to go find more of them and go and find more of them. It seems like you did that at least with Resy and with Blackbird.
Yeah, well, you can't build a great brand around mediocre restaurants. So I strongly believe the way to build a great brand is to work with great restaurants.
Yeah. Was that actively part of the strategy?
Yes.
And actually, I guess it's that way with Eater. It was too,
absolutely.
Right? You started writing about,
Danny Meyer and Keith McNally, who was at that time one of the greats. And
What are some of the things that you screwed up at Eater and Resy, or that you did really, really well that inform how you are running Blackbird today?
My great hope for myself in my own career, if I'm being honest, is that over time I've gotten better at being a manager. It's not something
So
that's
hard.
come easy to me,
Yeah.
but my hope is that over time I've gotten better at it. And so I think really in the end, the moments that I think back on Eater and Resy and lots of other things I've worked on, and I really say, man, I could have done better there. A lot of them are people management moments and team building moments. And I think that more than anything else
Is there something you're doing today with Blackbird that you can sort of pull up and think that, oh yeah, this is something I'm actually doing differently than I did before?
I would say certainly the kind of team, the caliber of people that we have around the table is as good a team as I've ever worked with. These are best in class individuals across the company. I think that as a priority as early as we've made it is a little bit different. I think I'm trying to delegate more and be less of a command and control CEO and more of a kind of coach. But every day is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Some days I'm more successful than others.
It's hard, man.
It's hard.
It's hard when you
really
have a
is.
vision and you want to make sure you're sticking to that vision.
Yeah, you know what? I think it comes down to being comfortable as a CEO sometimes with trust falls.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's if I had to think about it sort of in a very simple way, I think that's probably where it would be, where I would say that's the key thing is you just got to say, and sometimes on issues where you think that are very high leverage, where you say like, this is a real important moment for the company. In those moments, you have to be thinking more about building the muscle of your team than necessarily sticking the landing on the first try.
Yeah. 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 You talked about your superpowers before, that those are essential to whatever you decide to do. What are your superpowers?
I think I'm really good at understanding brand and developing brand and developing brand, especially around storytelling. And I think I have a pretty good sense of strategy, business strategy, go-to-market prioritization, understanding how to, from a strategic standpoint, move the ball down the field. I think more than anything else, those are the areas where I excel.
Where do you think that comes from?
You know, growing up, my dad always talked strategy with me. He's a lawyer, but he had a very strategic mindset about his cases. And I think maybe just reps. I've always been obsessed with brand, actually. I mean, some of it's restaurants. Like some of this is, the thing that I connect to in restaurants is the brand.
Yeah.
The good brand in a restaurant is the whole thing. A restaurant's not about the food. Everyone thinks a restaurant's about the food. No offense, because
No, I agree, by the way.
And they're not. Restaurants are about brand and are about vibe. And when you walk in the door, the energy that comes at you,
Yeah.
how are you reacting to that?
Yeah.
I think that people make a decision about a restaurant really fast. Like, I think that there's a sort of idea that restaurants have the course of the meal to sell you. I think by and large, that's not the case. Like if you walk into a restaurant and you're not feeling it, you have a humongous hole to dig yourself out of as a restaurant.
Yeah.
Now, there's a great concept that I've written about like here and there, and I talk to my team about all the time, which is the peak end rule. And this is a sort of behavioral psychology thing. And the idea is that in any experience, you remember two things. You remember the peak and you remember the end. So there's always an opportunity for the restaurant to get those things right and turn somebody into a regular. But I do think it's much harder than it looks. And I do think that's really, when you ask about brand and why that matters and why I'm any good at it, I think it's because I've developed that sense in restaurants.
Yeah. No,
I've seen so many.
I totally agree. I think for me, brand is how something makes you feel. And the food is a part of that. Food is sort of like, it's a table stake. It has to be delicious, and sometimes it has to be innovative, not always.
Totally.
And it always has to be consistent. And the same thing with service. It has to be great service, but that's just sort of the table stakes. Then how do I make you feel when you come in? If it's, we just talked about Tatiana. If it's Tatiana, do you feel this sort of energy of New York and and the history, and if you're going to go to Balthazar, like there's an energy you feel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And creating that is so hard.
So
it really
hard.
is, and it's also kind of rare, right?
Tatiana is a great example. I mean, I love Tatiana. I think Tatiana is just straight fire. Some of it is just, you don't really get to eat in the middle of Lincoln Center that often.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. Like just the anticipation of that restaurant.
Yeah.
Having to walk through that plaza.
Well, finding the restaurant's hard too.
You got the Met in front of you with the big Chagalls there.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, this is a real deal place. And then you walk in and it pops and it's got that sort of pretty dramatic interior. Yeah, Tatiana's a great example of that.
What do you think restaurants can do to create or improve their brand? Let's just say that like they just execute with exceptional precision. Food's delicious, service is great, but they still need, to find that.
I think it's really hard to develop brand as a skill, like to develop the ability to do that. I think though feedback matters a ton. I mean, I think the restaurant operators that are really, really good at getting it right over and over again, a lot of them are extremely receptive to feedback from people they trust. I think having a circle of people around you who are going to tell you the truth and who you're going to listen to, I think that matters. I mean, and some guys, I think actually one of the most successful operators in the country, I don't think this is even controversial to say, is Steven Starr.
Mm-hmm.
Steven Starr is actually, in my opinion, not an awesome brand guy, but he sure as hell knows what a good brand looks like. And that's a skill in of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And now in the second, third, fourth chapter of his career, he's actually doing that IP licensing thing, which I think is so important. He's gone to get some of the McNally pasties, Mozza,
Mm-hmm.
Babbo and Lupo, which he actually bought outright. He hasn't developed from scratch a whole lot of these, but he really, really knows how to
That's right.
execute.
I forgot he bought Fed Sal too.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, so obviously one of the most important parts about any restaurant is returning guests. So I wanted to sort of segue into,
dude.
Yeah, I'm going to segue into Blackbird. Before we talk about Blackbird, what's broken about loyalty programs today? Because they're not great.
What's broken about loyalty is that if you're a restaurant operator and you have less than $250 million of scale, there is no loyalty for you. The big operators have great loyalty. They have the scale, the resources, the leverage to get loyalty right. I mean, Melman has been doing this for a long time in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Deserves tons of credit, especially because it's in fine dining and not QSR.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of scale you need to be any good at loyalty. And that's a humongous problem for the average independent restaurant because they're battling those big dogs for their customers. I think that's the part of loyalty that maybe is somewhat misunderstood. Loyalty is not a priority exactly because every restaurant, quote unquote, needs loyalty. Loyalty is a priority because you're battling those guys for your customers.
Yeah.
And there's an arms war underway that I think operators are starting to get hip to, but it's not the direct idea that this person needs to walk into my restaurant and get a free drink. It's that if I don't do something to make this customer feel important, they're going across the street because those guys are getting loyalty right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, really analogous to airlines. I flew JetBlue all the time. Every once in a while, Mint, if I had to go to West Coast, and I can't fly them anymore. Like I literally won't because, all of a sudden in the last, 3 months, you just, I feel like like a stranger, and like they messed up my flight, mess up, and they, can't get a hold of anybody. That human need to feel special is so important.
It's so important.
So what's Blackbird? But it's funny, I think if I asked you this question a year and a half ago, it'd be a different answer. So
I think you're right, and I appreciate that that you noticed that. I'm an iterative thinker. The business is evolving, but where the business is and will continue to evolve to is to be a loyalty and payments company for the restaurant industry.
How does the loyalty work with Blackbird?
So loyalty works in a couple of different ways, but primarily loyalty for Blackbird is you walk into a restaurant, you check in using the Blackbird device, Blackbird Puck, or our app, and you get points and you get rewards because you've shown up. And those rewards vary based on the restaurant, based on the time of day, based on the day of the week, based on your status as a customer. But no matter what happens, you walk in, you check into the restaurant, you say hello through our app, and you get recognized for being there.
So you're rewarding frequency in addition to
We're rewarding
dollars.
frequency, and we are rewarding spend.
What was the other check-in thing? Foursquare.
Foursquare, yeah.
Didn't they sell because of the data? Didn't they?
They became a data company. Yeah. Foursquare was a pioneer in a lot of what we're doing. The big difference between Blackbird and Foursquare is that Foursquare focused on the social dynamics amongst guests.
Yeah.
Right? You got a mayorship, and that was boasting rights for you and your friends. Blackbird is focused on the restaurant guest relationship.
Yeah. Well, what I love about it too is I feel like it does create this sense of sort of another reason to go back, and
Sure.
and not even just to the single restaurant, but if I understand it correctly, you sort of get this aggregate benefit of all the restaurants you go to in the Blackbird network. Is that right?
We are very much inspired by the way good airline loyalty works. United, American, Delta, and the networks they've built. They've created incredibly good incentives to stay in those networks. And I really think that's the key unlock for the restaurant industry is if we can help restaurants capture and retain their customers and capture and retain the spend of those customers, then the future of the restaurant industry from an economic standpoint is much brighter than it is today.
Yeah. So how do restaurants join or get involved with Blackbird?
Pretty much any restaurant can sign up for Blackbird. You join the network, which means you are accepting Blackbird Pay. You are taking check-ins, and we develop it from there. Some restaurants are customizing the loyalty they offer in meaningful ways with real sort of bespoke branded stuff. Others are just using the points. But any restaurant in the country and someday the world will be able to sign up and join the network and start using the system.
Yeah. And so you said the puck, so there's like a hardware involved.
Yeah.
Right?
There's hardware for both the restaurant and the consumer. For the consumer, it's our puck. We call it a puck. It looks like a hockey puck. There's an NFC chip inside that, and you tap that puck when you walk into the restaurant, and that triggers a digital handshake between you and the restaurant. So you say, from a technical standpoint, I'm here. This is who I am. Happy to be here.
Gotcha. And that's like at the host stand?
It's at the host stand. Sometimes it's in a QSR setting. It's obviously at the cashier. We're evolving that quite a bit. And so by the end of the year, you'll be able to use a puck, or you'll be able to use GPS, or you might be able to use some other things when you're doing that check-in moment. But we're working on making it increasingly frictionless to check in.
GPS must be hard in cities, right?
GPS sometimes is great, and sometimes is very hard when you're in a super dense spot, as you said.
Yeah. Well, you have. I don't know if it's just a new launch or just another iteration of Blackbird, but it's Blackbird Pro or Blackbird Club. Is that what it's called?
Blackbird Club,
and then Blackbird Club Pro.
Yeah,
which that part seemed pretty cool. We got to talk about that. What is that? Is that basically what we're talking about, or is that this new iteration?
So Blackbird Club is our loyalty program. So one of the things that we've learned over the last 2 years is that in order for loyalty to really click and to really work, it needs to be more than points. There's two sort of building blocks, two fundamental pieces of loyalty. One is points, and the other is things that happen the more you use a service. And when we started Blackbird, we went to restaurants and we said, okay, when somebody shows up 3 times, what do you want to have happen? And when somebody shows up 6 times, what do you want to have happen? And we had this long form that we used in onboarding that literally broke it down in that way.
Mm-hmm.
We built the software to be that granular. If you wanted something different to happen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 visits, you could do it. And you could still do that today as a restaurant.
Yeah.
The problem is restaurants don't have that muscle.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why the big guys with their $250 million of revenue can do this and the indies can't is a resource question. The indies are not resourced for this. Not at the host stand, not at the back office, not from a data and analytics standpoint, not from a P&L and customer acquisition cost standpoint. In no way are they resourced for this. So what we realized is we're going to actually have to be a lot more prescriptive about this part of the program than we had initially thought. And so we really have spent the last year and a half developing Blackbird Club, which is our tiered loyalty offering. So at the end of the day, we want restaurants to feel like magic, and we want to bring back an old school sense of hospitality, sort of, old school hospitality, new school tech, if you will. And when we think about hospitality in the way it's really supposed to be in the end, right? When you think back to the days of 21 Club, or when there were real maitre d's and you walk into a restaurant, you got a handshake and eye contact, and the dream moment of where you walk through the back of the restaurant, casino style. That's the sort of hospitality that we so strongly believe is fundamental to good dining. And not every time, you don't have to walk into every restaurant and have a table materialize, but you do have to walk into every restaurant and feel like you're in the right place at the right time, and they know that you're there and are excited to see you. And so what we've really spent the last year and a half doing is figuring out what that looks like and how to build a loyalty club around that. And so Blackbird Club is our answer to that question of how do we bring old school hospitality back. So it's going to be a tiered program. The more you check in, the more you spend, the better your status. And there's going to be a variety of things that we offer. And it's going to range from anything like that's very simple, like guaranteed incomplete party seating, to
that's key,
to great access and guaranteed access at participating restaurants.
Yeah.
And lots of stuff in between.
So are you sort of appreciating these points in aggregate of all the places you go within the Blackbird network?
You accrue your points across the network.
Oh, that's
and you
cool.
can spend them anywhere in the network.
Yeah. It is a lot like, going to the Delta Lounge. You get access to that, or the premium seating where you get to go
Absolutely.
on the airplane first. Presume there's payments to it as well, right?
Of course, yeah. Blackbird Pay is a foundational piece of it. So after you check in, we've essentially opened a check for you on the restaurant side. You can get up and leave when you're done.
So is that they buy it, or they get an actual Blackbird credit card?
It's actually not a credit card. It's as good as a credit card, but it's digital and it's happening through our app. And so once you check in, we've essentially created a digital connection, and we're using that authentication to essentially open up a channel between you and the restaurant to transfer your points and to pay the bill.
Got it. And do you have to integrate with all the POS systems in order to?
We're working very hard on POS integration. I mean, I'll be totally honest and straightforward and say that the POS companies have not been our best friends here.
Yeah.
And so we've sort of decided two things. One is, well, I guess it's all the same thing. We've decided that we're not going to let POS be gatekeepers for us. And this is such an important issue for us to figure out for restaurants that we've built our own terminal that sits alongside the POS. So Blackbird is now POS agnostic, and you can set it up and work it alongside any POS. I think my great hope for the POS industry is over time, they become more amenable to progress, and over time they become more amenable to innovation. But today, POS is the great gatekeeper of innovation in restaurants, and it's unacceptable to us. And so we're working around them.
Why do you think that is, by the way?
Look, I think POS is kind of a tough business. I think, we've seen the POS players of the day try to expand into other things, try to work towards the consumer, try to own more of the relationship. Toast has tried lots of things. Toast has tried reservations, tried analytics, tried payments, tried anything you can think of. Inventory management, delivery, anything you can think of, Toast has tried. That's because at the end of the day, they need to expand somewhere.
Yeah.
You've got if you think about fine dining, there's two humongous players that are sitting next to each other, and they're slowly encroaching on each other's territory. DoorDash and Toast. And in order for them to grow, they're both going to need to swallow up some of the land, the real estate of the other, because there's just not, it's a finite amount of space.
Yeah.
So I think the POS companies are playing a little defensive right now and a little conservative from an innovation standpoint. And I think the restaurant, it's at the expense of the restaurant.
What do you think they should do?
I think they should open up these services. I think that it should be very easy to integrate with POS. POS companies should say, we get that we're the brain of the restaurant, but we also get that we can't do everything. And we're going to monetize our presence in the restaurant. There's only two screens in the whole restaurant. There's reservations and there's POS. And I honestly don't think that's changing anytime soon. I don't think there's going to be a new paradigm where there's 4 screens or 2 screens or 1 screen. I don't think it's going to happen. I think 2 screens is what is going to continue to be the technical implementation of the average restaurant.
Yeah.
And I think that the POS companies, if they were smart, they would understand how valuable that real estate is and do more to monetize the real estate, the presence they have, and do less in terms of gatekeeping on the software.
Yeah. And the payments, I mean, can a restaurant tech company actually get the scale of a POS company or similar to that without payments?
Oh, I don't think I think that when you think about the big time restaurant tech companies, payments is part of the mix for sure.
It's all we ever hear. Is this for my investors? Like, when are you going to
payments? Well, DoorDash, I mean, delivery, I guess, is not technically doing payments.
They're getting a piece of it.
They're getting a piece of it, but they're not providing the rails themselves. It's really hard. I mean, you have to. I think I do think. Look, the biggest opportunity that every company sees is to be in the flow of funds. To be in the flow of transactions, because otherwise you're just a SaaS company. And if you're a SaaS company, it's, I don't know, $79 a month, $200 a month, $600 a month. Good luck with that business. That's a sloggy business. If you can be in the flow of funds, then at least you can grow with the restaurant.
Yeah.
Now, the more people that are in the flow of funds, the less profit the restaurant has, which is exactly the problem in restaurants today. There's too many companies sitting in the middle. When you think about how this restaurant that we're in, Loring Place, interacts with technology, there's probably 4 or 5% that's leaking out to third parties. That's way too much.
How do you solve?
This is an A+ restaurant, but they're not making that much money.
Yeah.
They're not that profitable. It's hard to have orange windows and beautiful tables and all that stuff. The solve, we'll see. We'll see what happens next.
It's tough.
But we think we strongly believe part of that solve is to give some of this back to the restaurant industry from an ownership standpoint. We really strongly believe and will deliver a payments network that the restaurant industry co-owns. I think one of the phrases we used when we were starting Resy, in terms of framing it up from a marketing standpoint, was by restaurants for restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so proud of the fact that that is true. And we really did build that software with restaurants in partnership with them. But the key difference, and this is where Blackbird's a little bit different, I just said with restaurants. Resy wasn't really with restaurants from an economic standpoint. And I think that the key thing for Blackbird is we're going to be by restaurants with restaurants. Restaurants are going to be a part of this. They're going to wind up owning a part of this network that we build, so that as transactions flow through it, they're recapturing some of that value.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's the only way that it can work long term for all these services for restaurants. There's just not enough margin. What about Blackbird, the Club Pro, Blackbird Club Pro?
Well, so I think traditionally the restaurant industry is considered, guests and restaurants. When you think about the restaurant industry as a kind of marketplace, those are the two sides of the market: demand, supply. I think it turns out there's actually 3 pillars to the restaurant economy: guests, restaurants, and restaurant workers. And the more you think about restaurants versus restaurant workers, the more you see that actually their interests are not 100% aligned. They're probably 50% aligned.
Yeah, and there's orders of magnitude more workers than...
There certainly are. But, when you think about their interests, the interest they share is that the restaurant stays open and there's a lot of guests in the restaurant. The more guests in your shift, the more money you're going to make, the happier you are. You need the restaurant to be open. But beyond that, there's a lot of difference between what's important to a restaurant worker and what's important to the restaurant. And so we've really thought about, if there are 3 pillars and not 2, how do we make sure that all 3 pillars of the economy, all 3 of these groups, are A, participants, and B, super happy? And that is really what Pro is going to be about. That is a program that we are building specifically for the workers of restaurants. Some of it is already out the door. If you're a restaurant worker and you are working at a Blackbird powered restaurant, you have a purple puck behind the scenes somewhere back of house that you use to check in. And when you check in on the purple puck, we flag you as a worker and we give you more points. So what we're going to add to that in the coming months is a loyalty status specifically for restaurant workers. There's going to be specific benefits at Blackbird restaurants for industry workers. And this is something that I won't take any of the credit for this one because restaurants have been creating reciprocal relationships with each other for a long time. So I think what we're doing is just kind of formalizing and scaling a concept.
Well, it's been an honor system.
It's been an honor system, and it's sort of been a little bit word of mouth. But we want to formalize that and scale it, and have, as an industry worker, you understand that you can go to thousands of restaurants and get that industry worker treatment, which whether that means 20% off on Mondays, or water is always free, or better access, or better points. There's a bunch of stuff that we can do and we can deliver specifically for workers of the restaurant industry. And it's incredibly important to us.
So smart. And it's also, one, I'm sure it's going to be great for acquisition. Danny Meyer did this. I remember, I think it was a couple decades since I worked for him. I think he still does it, but you got dollars to go to his other restaurants that you worked, that you didn't work at. And it was great. And it was sort of like, on your day off, you're going and eating there, and you're also providing feedback and things like that.
Exactly. If you work at Tableau, why not spend your money at Gramercy Tavern?
Yeah. And I think the requirement was to provide feedback. You had to provide feedback.
Yeah.
Which is brilliant. No, I don't know if that's a part of the...
We actually haven't thought about the feedback loop yet, to be honest with you, but we should.
Yeah, because if I'm a restaurant, I want to know what cooks at another restaurant think about my food, and I want to know what servers think about my service.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and it's going to be honest.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're not going to, they're not going to BS, depending on how you deliver the feedback. But maybe it needs to be anonymous or something. But I don't know if you think this way, but do you think about what the future of Blackbird looks like?
A magical loyalty and payments experience in 100% of the world's restaurants.
Yeah. Have you ever done the 11-star experience exercise? Brian Chesky from Airbnb had this sort of premise of, it's sort of a design thinking premise of, what's the 11-star experience of an Airbnb? A 5-star experience is that you get there and it's what it's supposed to be, and it's clean and everything works. And then the 6-star experience is that they've left your favorite bottle of wine, and it goes up and up and up until 11-star is, you're flying in a private jet and there's a parade waiting for you. And it's a way to sort of envision not just good, but like incredible looks like, and then you sort of like find something in between. You're starting something that, when it works, when it's ubiquitous, will change the way the restaurant industry works. So maybe a better question is like, how do you see the restaurant industry changing when Blackbird is ubiquitous?
Well, I want restaurants to be completely in control of their own economic destiny. That to me is the key thing when we talk about where this lands. Restaurants are not in control today. Restaurants are seeing declining margins, and they have no idea how to fix that. And what I want is for restaurants to be in control. So what it means is meaningful ability to fill seats on off nights, meaningful ability to reward your best customers at prime time, real control of the experience, real control of what in the end is yield management, right? Of yield management of the restaurant, dining room inventory. But it's really about giving restaurants that control.
Yeah, I love it. This was awesome. I appreciate it. And I learned a lot. I'm excited to sign up. I think I can sign in here, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Cheers.